between, I think, 2023 and 2024, terrorism-related incidents in Canada are up almost 500%. For the size of the country, the amount of terrorism-related incidents that has happened here, much of which is targeted against the Jewish community, it's astounding. Violence, particularly against Jews, it's seen as legitimate. Israeli authorities have said, if you're Israeli and you're in Canada, you need to take greater precautions. Like, that's pretty wild. College campuses have been crazy. Things like anti-Palestinian racism, which sort of began in Canada, are permeating into the US. And I think in time, unfortunately, we will face our own attacks here in Canada. It's just that's going to happen. I feel like Jews now are only accepted if they're good Jews, if they are the right Jews that other people want us to be. And I'm sure that that's how other people have felt before, people in the Latino community or the Black community or the Asian community. Since October 7th, it's really made me go like, oh my God, other people have been dealing with this around me. And I probably wasn't that attuned to it over the last 20 years. Now I am.
This is our first episode of a podcast that we've launched and that will continue to feature different soldiers on the front line fighting anti-Semitism. On this show, we have Dr. Casey Babb. He's a globally respected scholar on anti-Semitism and Israeli security. He really talks to us about what's happening right now on the front lines of fighting anti-Semitism in Canada, specifically Toronto, and what he sees as a larger geopolitical shift of the West. We also have Josh Weiner, who's the Chief Marketing and Development Officer at Navi. Josh really speaks to how important it is to rein in this ideological and political dogma that's affected the extreme left and the extreme right, and how important it is to rein it back to the center.
Hey everyone, welcome to Jew and Stew. I'm here with Daniel Schwartz, and we have our first guest for this podcast, Casey Babb. Casey is a senior fellow at the MacDonald Laurier Institute. Casey, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Casey, tell us a little bit about your Jewish background. Like, what was your Jewish upbringing like?
It was, I sort of describe it as like Seinfeld and bagels, really. We weren't particularly religious, didn't really celebrate the high holidays. My parents would let me know they'd be like, oh yeah, it's like Rosh Hashanah or it's whatever. But we didn't do a lot around that. Our household was really anchored our Judaism more to the sort of the cultural side of Jewish life in the West, whether that's pop culture or food or whatever. But one element that was always definitely there from a very young age was a love for Israel and learning about, to the extent that was possible. My dad, he's not a historian, but he had enough there. He, telling me about some of the iconic figures in Israel, Moshe Dayan and Golda Meir and all these. So I grew up hearing about these people, but that's sort of where my upbringing was sort of structured from a Judaic perspective.
What were your parents' connection to Israel? Like, what was that like? What was that based in?
I think it was just based in, them being proud, and Israel being a sense of pride for most of the Jewish world, and still, neither of my parents have made it to Israel. They still haven't been, and still, so that's interesting. I've thought about that quite a bit. I run into people all the time who are like, diehard Zionists, but they just haven't made it to Israel yet for whatever reason. But that doesn't take away from their sort of the way that they feel sort of tethered to Israel. So I think that's where it came from. And I think, with my dad, him telling me about Israel, telling me about, explaining what happened in 67 or 73 or 48 and so on and so forth. That was sort of his way of letting me know that life isn't easy for the Jews. It might have been easier for him to explain conflict to a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old than it is to explain sort of the literal realities that I might have to face as a young person.
I feel like I could relate to a little bit of that just pedigree of Jewishness. Like, do you feel like when so you're 35, I'm 37, we just established, and we kind of grew up in the 90s, which I would almost call like the golden era of Jewry assimilation when I was growing up. I mean, we had Seinfeld on the TV, capturing the zeitgeist in the country, the nanny, Jewry was cool, so I just feel, and I really want to learn more about that journey and that juxtaposition, let's say after October 7th in your life versus like your entire childhood of understanding your Jewish identity, to where you are today, like professionally, and what really was the catalyst to drive you there.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a great point, because there was an article that I'd recommend everybody read. Came out in the Atlantic in March of 2024 about the golden age of American Jewish life coming to an end. I know that when it came out, it made a bit of a splash because of October 7th, and nothing had really been written like that in that way. But yeah, you're right on the money. So, I grew up not really. There were little incidents of I don't even know if I would call them anti-Semitism, because some things happen that might come off as anti-Semitic, but they're not really. They're just people being idiots, or they're just, there's so much of that. And that happens with, all kinds of minority communities. They face things where it's like, well, I'm not, that person might not necessarily be racist. They probably just said something that they shouldn't have said, so I dealt with that sort of stuff growing up. But yeah, it was very much, I feel like I grew up in the tail end of the golden age of Jewish life in Canada, which is now over. And I really came into my Jewish life not during a period of like Jewish prosperity and acceptance, but actually the opposite. It was the hardship of Jewish life that drew me in where I was, which is, there's good things and bad things about that, but where I was I realized that, like, if I don't do the right thing here, if I don't come down on the right side of this and really own who I am and who my people are at this time, that's going to be terrible for not just for me, but for my family, for the Jewish community going forward, and, next generation. So I don't know how clear my answer is, but yeah,
I relate, by the way, to your answer, because I think getting a taste of the golden age and then seeing that juxtaposition and seeing this community's head on the chopping block, and we were always the first to show up for other communities, was so sobering and so quick and so fast. And I think that, to add to that, the Jewish community actually relied on many institutions, Jewish institutions, that we were hoping that would kind of show up at that time of need. When they didn't, it was either we needed to start mobilizing ourselves or just accept, that anti-Semitism in Jewish faith.
Yeah, I'd even add more complexity to that too, because it's not that like anti-Semitism didn't exist. I remember in Highland Park, where I went to like JCC basketball camp, we'd have games get canceled because of bomb threats.
Oh, wow.
And then also we had like, I think there was just this subversive, under the waterline anti-Semitism that wasn't like hateful towards Jews, but it made Jews feel maybe not proud to be Jewish. Like people would lean into tropes about us, like, neurotic, anxious, goofy, unathletic, always smart, high expectations. The money thing I felt like always existed. Those things kind of, I think, for me, when I was younger, didn't help me lean into my Judaism. They actually made me kind of more likely to lean out. And then later in life, I sort of found that identity is more important to me.
Can I make a footnote? Seinfeld never even expressed their Jewry. So it's almost like, to reiterate what Josh is saying, that maybe it was there. Maybe it was something where we had this false sense of security, but it was just waiting to crack, and waiting for that.
And there's something there too. Like if you look at some of the big names, whether they're shows or music artists or pop cultural references during the 90s and into the 2000s, when I was growing up, they were positive, they were light, they were funny, they were Jewish, but they didn't necessarily need to explicitly say they were Jewish. Everybody just loved it and got the humor because it's very Jewish. Now, if you look at maybe, I don't know, the last 3, 5 years, I don't know how far back you want to go, 10 years. If you said, who are the biggest names right now in that space, who are the Jews that come to mind? They're Jews that are like sort of punch you in the teeth Jews, like Michael Rappaport or Dave Portnoy or other people who are really coming out and owning their Jewishness in not a confrontational way, but in a defensive way, rather than in the ways that we've been discussing in terms
like a cultural expression kind of way. Yeah, no, that is.
Well, that's like the antithesis of what I was talking about, right? Because we were kind of framed that as Jews we're maybe not like the strongest community, like power and strength and pride wise. And I feel like that's the difference now. Like people are really leaning into that because we've had to be put on the defensive.
I'm also now seeing on social media types of Jews that I didn't know existed or didn't think about, I should say, prior to maybe a few years ago or within the last, decade. From different parts of the world, Persian Jews, Jews from Iraq, the Ethiopian community. There's just such a wide spectrum. I mean, even Jews who are part of the queer community, who are now like influencers in terms of health and fitness. I've never seen so many in the last 3 years. I have never seen so many jacked Jews in my life. Like I never thought that was really a thing. And now you're seeing people really come out and own that. And so there's the nature of what I think of when the days of Seinfeld and Sandy Koufax stories and, Miami in the 50s and 60s and 70s and all these great stories that I would hear about from my dad. It's different now. The ecosystem is so much different now. And I think a lot of that derives from not just October 7th, but, things that have much of what's happened in the Middle East over the last maybe 10, 20 years.
Yeah, it's certainly been a progression, especially as like anytime there's been a conflict with Gaza or in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, it's been like over time, the culture has really been anti-Israel, especially as social media has proliferated. And I think that like since 2014, which I think is kind of the time that the iPhone came and social media started getting really more popular, that's sort of, I feel like, the time where tide started to change against Israel and where anti-Semitism really started to like blossom in an anti-Zionist form.
Yeah, and it is really that the level of bigotry and the nature of it, which has changed quite a bit as well. I mean, I've written about this in the Globe and Mail, and I've spoken about it all over the place. In Chicago, I spoke about it. But, my dad experienced, again, I don't even know if I would call it, I guess I think of it as anti-Semitism, but it's just people being dicks. Like, he went in university, so let's say he's 80 now. So this is in the 60s. Walking into a university classroom 15, 20 years after the Holocaust, and people would turn the gas valves and hiss when he walked into the room. And this is in Canada. I know.
In America too, like School Ties, if you've ever seen it, it was very ubiquitous.
I also went to school in Minnesota.
Oh, wow.
And I played hockey there, like club hockey, not D1 hockey. But I would, especially like around St. Cloud, I'd get the, Jew, you burn in the oven, the K word, like on the ice. And I didn't even have the name on the back of my jersey. They literally looked at the roster, found my Jewish name, and started, heckling me on the ice. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. See, for me, so my dad experienced that. And, he told me that, growing up in Miami, they'd call Cadillacs like Jew canoes and stuff like that. And, all that sort of BS. But for me, I would just have people say, irritating things or things that I would laugh off. But so there's two things that I just want to mention quickly. One is that, from childhood to probably, into my teens, generally speaking, not just me, I think it's easier for people to just adapt and go, oh, whatever. And then they're just on to the next thing. And it's like, they don't think too much about certain things, maybe. It's easier to just go, well, whatever, like that person's an idiot. The older you get, the older I got, the more I started thinking about, like, it's harder to ignore these things. And you really start to think about them. And so there's not that, sort of losing that naivete and there's something there as well that comes with just maturing and realizing, what is actually happening around you and the world, right? Like when I was a child, I'm not reading about Gaza. I'm not reading about if the Pittsburgh shooting happened when I was 10, like I probably wouldn't know that, you know what I mean? Or if I was 12. Now it's everything. So there's that. And then that level of hatred is not just about, it's changed where it's not just about money or saying stupid things about, oh, you people have this or that, or, turning the gas valves on, like your destruction. And it is more existential than it is just people being idiots. So there's something there too.
Yeah, I mean, that the hate is justified now. You are a baby killer. You're just a Jewish guy in Canada, and similar to how you could be a Russian guy in Canada and disagree with Russia, right? But there's something there where it's when the Jew hate gets turned on, they justify it now through this lens of you specifically, just some guy living in 3,000 miles away is responsible for the death of everything that happens in this war. And it's just and that's why I think there's still naivete here, because they still don't understand what they're like. Oh, Jews are crying about anti-Semitism again, those nebbishy Jews, and it's just that, well, first of all, they deny us to even be a victim. So being a Jewish person living in, the diaspora, and now we're now responsible for everything that Israel does, it kind of justifies the hate, or whoever's spitting the propaganda out on these social media networks. It justifies the aggression against the Jews, because now all of a sudden the hate is justified through this lens of, if we don't do this, we're immoral. If we don't express our Jew hate, we're immoral.
Yeah, we have to be, and I've woken up to a lot of the things that other minority groups have probably faced their entire lives as well. Like, what you are only accepted, I feel like Jews now are only accepted really if they're good Jews, if they are the right Jews that other people want us to be. And I'm sure that that's how other people have felt before, whether that's, people in the Latino community or the Black community or the Asian community. Like, it's so much of what's happened, especially since October 7th, it's really made me go like, oh my God, other people have been dealing with this around me. And I probably wasn't that attuned to it over the last, 20 years. But now I am.
It's really interesting, though, because it's like it's the same thing, but it's flipped. Like, the expectations that we had as a society for the right kind of Black person was always to elevate them into our expectation of what white society would be. But now the idea of what the Jew that is acceptable to me is the one who actually gives up their power or their wealth or their success or any of that. So,
oh, wow. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah, and I talk about this a lot, that we've basically created a permission structure for hate and violence against the oppressor. And because of the way anti-Semitism works and the way that you frame Jews as the all-powerful, the people who have all the money, the people who are kind of like holding that network or conspiracy of power, we fit in that oppressor spot better than really anybody from a stereotype or inference perspective. So this is really problematic for us, because what Danny said is it becomes virtuous to hate Jews, because it is more virtuous to strip people of power than the opposite, which is to punch down at people who already don't have power.
Yeah, wow, absolutely. And so the situation in Canada, not to shift away too much here,
Oh, it's perfect.
but what we deal with here, I don't know. My sense is that it's not nearly as pronounced in the U.S., but you correct me if I'm wrong. You obviously have Americans have a very complex history with your Native American community. Here in Canada, it's like the guilt associated with that has become part of Canada's identity. And connected to that, and Adam Kirsch writes about this in his book on settler colonialism.
Great book. Very dense. Yes.
I like a nice slim book. Like you look at it and you go,
very slim.
It's so,
but it's so dense. Like yeah.
It's
there
like,
you go. Yeah.
But you read it and it's like every page is just like mind blowing. Where that righteousness, that virtue signaling is. So in Canada, people are. How can I word this? People subconsciously here know that despite us doing land acknowledgements at every meeting, every event, every university graduation, every public event, and talking about unceded territory, unceded land, talking about implying that what we have now can be undone, to go back to another time. People know that subconsciously that's never going to happen, but also subconsciously, maybe consciously, people have now come to learn and believe that, well, we might not be able to undo these injustices here in Canada and probably in the United States. We're not going to go back in time where certain tribes, certain groups of people, everything is theirs and now they control the land and there's some sort of inversion of the situation right now. But it could be possible in Israel. And so there's an element of that we're now dealing with here, where the only place in the world where people can look to and think that there is a plausible chance of undoing or correcting an unnatural occurrence, an unnatural phenomenon, a historical injustice is Israel. And so the Jews in Canada really feel that here because that's what they're teaching people at universities. And that's sort of what, even in government offices, I mean, these are the sorts of things that are being ingrained in people and elsewhere.
No, just before we started, I was saying I always look at Canada as not the 51st state, but the area that's always in maybe 10 degrees ahead of us ideologically, or in this ideological warfare almost, if that makes sense. And so I want to know what you're smelling, seeing, touching on the ground as you're in these trenches, and maybe see what the difference is here or the similarities.
It's tough to say. I mean, I think you're not wrong in that what we deal with here seems to be a bit more ideological, at least sooner than some of these trends seem to bubble to the surface in Canada faster than they do in the U.S. But then on the flip side of it, there have been in the U.S., like no-go zones of entire cities that are taken over. There have been, some of the protests, if you can even call them that, at college campuses have been like crazy. There's been, you're dealing with what happened in DC, what happened in Boulder, Pittsburgh. I think all of that is on its way here. So there are certain things that are maybe they're going in opposite directions. Maybe things like anti-Palestinian racism, which sort of began in Canada, are now sort of permeating into the U.S. And I think in time, unfortunately, we will face our own attacks here in Canada. It's just that's going to happen.
But maybe it just takes Americans less to get to violence than Canadians.
I think you're right on. I mean, you've got a few things that make it a little easier in the States to get violent, but we don't have firearms here to the extent that you do in the U.S. and so on. But that's a whole other conversation. I don't want to, I'm not for or against any of that. I don't, whatever.
It does very much feel like I go back to like the 2010s And Canada was always framed as this, like, look at this great progressive place. It's such a nice place to live. It's so safe and clean. And over a 10-year period, which was basically like the Trudeau period, it like totally went into the dump as far as like the cities in particular. The crime, the cost of living, the economy, especially comparatively to the US, and the drugs too in like cities like Vancouver.
I mean, it's beyond. You talk to people here, first generation immigrants, second generation immigrants. They're like, this is not. The message is like often, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought it was going to be. You actually have people coming to Canada now who come here. They're here for a little bit, and then they're like, no, I'm out, and they go back. They go back to India, or they go back to Pakistan, or they go back to Bangladesh, and no, like they didn't come here to work in a Tim Hortons and have to share a one bedroom with like 8 people. Like that's not what anybody really had in mind.
So I'm a Jew going to, hey, can I bring my family to Canada and feel safe? What are you going to tell me?
Yeah, but it depends what kind of Jew you are. If you
A visible one.
Like I wear my kippah on the street and I live in Montreal.
Yeah, how's that going to work out?
Well, I would, because I'm fine with a little,
Yeah, but you're inferring that there might be a little.
Yeah, no, there would be. I wouldn't advise most others to do it. I personally would, but I would be prepared for conflict for sure. Like I dropped my kids off this morning, and this is like a 5-minute drive home. On my drive home, I saw a car go by with a massive Palestinian flag, like blowing off the back of the car. You can't leave I don't know if this is like this in Chicago, but you can't. Every single time I leave the house, if I go out for lunch today, I'm going to see either a Palestinian flag or a keffiyeh or something. I don't know if it's like that in Chicago, and what comes with that, especially in big cities like Toronto and Montreal, is a heightened threat environment. Like it's just the reality of the situation. Anti-Semitism, we've become one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world, in the Western world. I mean, so much so that like the Israelis have written reports on the situation in Canada. And in recent weeks, Israeli authorities have said, if you're Israeli and you're in Canada, like you need to be more, you need to take greater precautions. Like that's pretty wild.
That is wild.
Yeah, I have this well, first of all, I'll get to Chicago. We have the largest Palestinian population by volume in the United States.
No, come on. Really?
There's an area in the southwest side, like suburbs, called Little Palestine. It's referred to. Dearborn, you would think is, but that's actually the most by percentage. And then we have a very large just Arab and Muslim population. So my experiences in the city, I see Palestinian flags a lot. I go out clubbing in the gay community. I see keffiyehs out at the clubs. We'll go to Gay Pride this year. CJA will do like we come with Israeli symbols and the Magen David rainbow flag. We will get taunted. We'll get a lot of positive feedback, but we'll get taunted, and I'll for sure see keffiyehs and Palestinian flags at the Pride Parade.
I always find that such a weird, like, I don't even have to say it. I'm like, I don't really get that.
Well, it's not even that. It's the liberalism in general. It's like if you stand for liberalism, like the actual principles of liberalism, then it's antithetical to a lot of these regimes surrounding Israel. And then you would be running so fast to Tel Aviv, to support any one of these liberal principles. It's ridiculous.
But I think like where I was going to with that is it's interesting. America has a very strong conservative backbone that prevents some of these things from getting out of control. Now, like obviously there's extremism that's happening. I think we have this kind of pendulum of like it gets more extreme on the left and then the right and then the left and the right, which is really unhealthy. But when I think of anti-Semitism, I think, oh my gosh, Canada looks so much worse. The UK looks even worse than that. And Australia looks like a dumpster fire. But that's my perception from here. So I don't know how you see it too, just actually living in Canada, thinking about the US and what you've heard from the UK and Australia. So we talked a little bit about this idea of settler colonialism and the Adam Kirsch book, and this manifests itself in schools with decolonize the curriculum, decolonize your mind, decolonize social work, like decolonize everything. And something that Kirsch talks about is really where this ends up. If you actually followed this, there's no utopia at the end. You have to basically end in extreme violence in order to meet these means. And you talked about how Israel is kind of the only place that you can do that in a realistic way, which is really terrible. But like, I kind of want to, like, how do you see that bridging to anti-Semitism and sort of like the virtuing, creating other problems in society in Canada or the US or other places?
And Barry Weiss wrote about this in the Free Press after the murders in DC. Welcome to the Intifada. Like, this is, even that term, Intifada, is now seen by many people as like a virtuous idea, and where violence, particularly against Jews, is seen as an extension of, it is explicitly connected to ideas like decolonization, and explicitly tethered to the righting the wrong that is Israel. And so we're now in a situation where so much of this violence is, it's seen as legitimate. And it's not just legitimate, but actually virtuous. And a lot of that, especially in Canada, but, of course, in the US and elsewhere, is connected to what we've been talking about, that whole idea of decolonizing a system, starting with Israel. Now, to your point, in theory, and I think about this, I've thought about writing something like, if every Jew in Israel said we've had enough and they moved somewhere else, well, decolonization we would be told that it still needs to continue on, and now this needs to be applied to another people, or maybe the same people where they've moved, but it's this never-ending process. And so now we're in this very dangerous situation where I think a lot of Jews in Canada are thinking, okay, so if I was the target of an attack, or if our community was targeted, there might not be as much backlash or an outcry as we would have expected. And so we have to be more vigilant. We have to keep our head on a swivel. We have to take greater steps for our security. A lot of people are hiding their Judaism. There's community security now. Events are held in secrecy. Every single Jewish event that I'm invited to or involved with, the location is sent out, sometimes so last minute that I can't make it. I can't go there. Had I known it was 40 minutes away, I would have planned for that, but I can't make it now.
We have a new policy that we have an on-duty security or on-duty police officer at every one of our events now.
On top of the other security protocols we have.
Yeah. And I mean, you see, and I won't get into it too much, but you see Israel's ambassador to Canada around town, and you'd think it was the president passing by you. Like, the security is that intense. And a lot of this is a byproduct of this whole decolonization mentality, which is now sort of a way of life for a lot of people.
The righting the wrong really integrates itself into the misinformation that we get, not only about Jews in Israel, but other things as well. So I've had experiences in placing media in certain outlets, and the equity boards will censor certain things from the editorial board or get them off of the editorial pipeline because they perceive them as, I think, without saying it, not being part of that message of righting the wrong. And you guys had an interesting thing in Canada around the mass graves and the Catholic churches. You know about this, right?
I mean, it's just beyond. It's so insane. A lot of this, Josh, is so crazy that, like, I don't even know how I'll be able to. How do I explain that to my kids in 10 years, 15 years.
Can I ask you a question? Because I think sometimes we like to over intellectualize this. Let's try under intellectualizing this for a second. If you like imagine a microcosm of the world on a playground, and you really just like kind of divvy up the population and you think about the psychology and sociology of a human, and you see like, there's let's just think about the population size of Christianity, of Islam, of Hindu, and you put them on a playground, and then you got just like one Jewish kid and he's doing pretty good and whatever. I mean, it just seems almost like human nature is not to actually go after the aggressor or the in crowd. It's to put it all on this one kid, because that's just like the psychology behind humanity. Do you think maybe that explains some of this stupid naivete where it's easy to just buy in and point the finger at that guy? Because that could be a very easy problem solving reason why my life sucks or why the playground's not great for me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that too. And there's also this the complete, normalization of this stuff. Something that I thought was so telling. I don't know if either of you saw this clip, but again, bringing up Dave Portnoy, who, by the way, I never was like a huge Portnoy fan, but like lately I'm like, oh, this is the man.
Now you're placing bets on yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh, enough with the pizza. And I'm like, I'm in New York and I'll go to a pizza place and they'll have like him in the window and like, it'll be like an 8.4. And I'm like, oh, now I don't even want to, like, it's just, but I love him now. But he was just in Toronto doing, one of those pizza reviews. I don't know if you saw this. But as he's in the middle of talking outside of this pizza.
Oh, I did see it. F the Jews.
Yeah. That is not what caught my attention. I go, well, yeah, that's normal. You're in Toronto, baby. Like that's, if it didn't happen, I'd go, oh, that was he had a great trip. It's that everyone behind him laughed. And it's that, and he turns around and goes, why are you guys laughing? And they all were like, oh, it's that normalization where it's like the people behind him laughing don't hate Jews, but they just think it's become a natural part.
Palpable. Totally.
This happened at City Hall in Chicago. We had a hearing about anti-Semitic art exhibit, and the ADL representative of the Midwest came up and told a story about him being spit on the street in Chicago, and all of the people in keffiyehs and with Palestine flags laughed, all of them.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It's the complete legitimization of violence and of being ostracized and racism. I mean, it's crazy, and it's very bad here in Canada, and it's getting worse.
But also, you hear these stories about the Holocaust didn't start overnight. It was incremental, right? It's like you move the goalpost to say, okay, it's great to have it here, but now we can move it here and we can laugh at the Jew, and then we can do this, and then we can, I think it's that way of slowly manipulating the narrative, slowly manipulating people to accept different levels of, hate against Jewish people.
It also just leaves people to believe things because they seem to be in the agenda of righting the wrong. So like the non-Jewish example or the non-anti-Semitic example that I was trying to bring up is this thing around mass graves, that they basically took Native American children from their families and then took them to these Catholic schools, and they ended up basically genociding natives and burying them in the churches. And there's literally no proof of this, but people believed it because it runs with that narrative of righting the wrong. And then this is where you get what happens with, like, the last couple of months. We had the libel of the 14,000 children starving in the next 48 hours.
If you even step back for a second, I studied warfare and conflict. I have a Ph.D. in international affairs with a specialization in conflict. I mean, it doesn't take wherever has there been 14,000 babies killed in 48 hours. Like, even in the Holocaust, that wasn't, so many children, over 1 million children were killed in the Holocaust, correct? Like, in a 48-hour period. So it's just, I go, how is that? What are they even talking about? If you take a step back from some of this stuff, it's like people don't even, this is a whole other issue, right? People aren't thinking critically about things. And if you look at, Jonathan Haidt or other people, they talk about the cognitive decline of not just of children, but of adults and their ability to process information, to reason, look at literacy rates. I mean, all of this is sort of converging and making the situation for Jews in the West very problematic. But yeah, to your point that, Daniel, I mean, Josh, you seem to know about this, the mass graves hoax. We were told, it was the biggest story in the country for a long time, that there were mass graves of Indigenous children across the country. And this led to the burning of churches across the country. I think we burned hundreds of churches down in Canada. I'm pretty sure it was hundreds. No one's come out and said, yeah, we got that bad. The CBC's never come out. No one's ever come out and said, yeah, we got that wrong. People don't even talk about it anymore. They're like, if you ask the average person now, where do we leave things with the mass graves? They go, oh yeah, I don't know. Like, it's just, they're on to the next thing.
In the 90s.
Yeah. It was like 2 years ago.
But this is like they just start to deny that they were even ever a part of it. It was just kind of like, no, whatever. We'll just push that aside like it didn't matter. Meanwhile, churches were being burned. Could you imagine if 100 mosques were burned?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, we have 700 or 800 in Canada. I mean, none of them have been burned down, to the best of my knowledge. So, yeah, it's crazy. And so, and we're teaching people about this stuff. We're teaching people to think this way, not in universities, but long before universities. And we talked about anti-Palestinian racism. There's stuff coming out that, the Toronto District School Board, the largest school board in the country, represents, roughly 250,000 students. They've just voted to make anti-Palestinian racism part of their anti-hate strategy. And now trustees and senior leadership in the school board have to take a mandatory course on anti-Palestinian racism. So it's getting out of hand.
Just to solidify what this is, a lot of this ideology that gets taught, it teaches that there's a dominant narrative and then there's a narrative of the oppressed, and that narrative of the oppressed needs to be centered. And specifically with anti-Palestinian racism, there is a narrative of the Nakba. And if you question any part of that narrative or present facts that come from the dominant narrative that oppose that, you are being racist against Palestinians. And it goes further than that, but that's one of the components of it.
Yeah. And it's not the anti-Palestinian racism issue. And this isn't, anti-Islamic bigotry is a real thing in Canada. There have been terrorist attacks in Canada targeting the Muslim community. When we start to get into the Nakba and anti-Palestinian racism, we could potentially be in a situation where your necklace, Josh, mine is, we get reported for being racist. Well, he's Jewish. Even talking about the creation of the state of Israel, which of course is part of the Nakba story. If we talk about that could be racist. And so we're now, I always say to people, we never think, we don't have much of an imagination. I don't mean Jews. I just mean people generally. We go, well, that's crazy. That's not going to happen. We say that about everything. And then a lot of these things happen. If you had said to somebody on September 10th, 2001, that there's going to be multiple commercial jets flying into your most important landmarks in the country, killing thousands of people, you'd go, you're insane. I think it's much more conceivable to think about a situation in 5 or 10 or 25 years where there's no open Jewish life in Canada. That to me is much more realistic than, the thought of a massive, creative, destructive terrorist attack. I go, well, that could definitely happen. It only takes a few things. It just takes a few policies in school boards, the wrong handful of politicians, the wrong prime minister, and you're there in 10, 20 years. All of this is now, it's created a situation where I'm interacting with people probably every week, once a week, maybe once every couple of weeks, who are leaving Canada, Jews who are leaving Canada to move to the US or to move to Israel or somewhere else. I've had students who have now, 2 students left Canada, left the programs here. They're both studying in Israel now, and they'll probably never move back to Canada. I'm working on a book right now. The editorial assistant student in Canada. She's now studying in Israel. So, yeah, I think, most people in Canada are probably unaware of these issues. We have a population of 40 million. How many people know about anti-Palestinian racism? Probably not many people. They want to pay their bills. They're worried about the cost of gas, the cost of milk, the cost of living, crime. If I brought up APR to them, they wouldn't have any idea what I'm talking about. But people who are watching this space know that we're getting into dangerous territory, and Jews are starting to wake up to this for sure, especially with these attacks in the U.S. recently.
Is there any, specifically in Canada, you guys have a new prime minister. What does that look like now? Like, how do you feel about this new administration?
Yeah, I told people that not to expect much of this new government. If anything, I suggested that it could be a little worse because with the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, at least after, sort of the first couple of years were behind that government, and whatever that, period was of excitement had worn off, most Canadians didn't take him seriously. I mean, if he was talking about something, people would roll their eyes. He just wasn't a serious guy, even though he tried to be. And he didn't have really the background and the credentials that I think many leaders need, that people expect leaders to have, that credentialize their legitimacy. We now have a prime minister who has I think he has a Ph.D. in economics from Oxford. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada. I mean, his name is literally on our money. It's written on our money because he was the governor of the bank. He was the first, I think, non-British governor of the Bank of England. He went from being governor of the Bank of Canada, moved to the UK, and then became the governor of the bank.
He's got to be smart, no? I mean, that sounds like a pretty incredible career.
I mean, I'm sure he is, although most of the dumbest people I've ever encountered were in the halls of, university during my PhD. They're just insane people. But when he talks, I think he has the credentials and the legitimacy, so he can say the same things as Justin Trudeau, and people will listen to him and take it more seriously. He looks the part more than JT did. When you look at him, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see him as prime minister for sure. And already, I mean, he's only been in, oh God, when was the election? The election just happened. I'm blanking. I think it was in April.
I think you blacked it out.
Yeah. The election was April, I think 24th. It's June 5th today. We're recording on June 5th. He has already released a statement with the UK and France, the first line of it saying that they are completely against the expansion of Israeli military operations in Gaza. That's crazy. I've never heard that.
Even the framing of that.
I've never heard, I don't know if Canada has ever in our nation's history released a statement of that nature directed towards an allied nation at war. I don't think we have ever. So that's already been released. And the language in there is pretty clear that Israel's going to face, if you don't do what we're saying for you to do, there's going to be repercussions. I mean, you should check out the statement. It's wild. His new minister of foreign affairs, again, people really respect her in the country. She was the former minister of national defense. Of all his cabinet ministers, she's probably one of the top ones where people go, oh yeah, she's pretty good. Anita Anand. She has already issued statements, on the whole matter of starvation, and she's already spoken about food being used as a weapon of war. There's been, multiple social media posts about this. And, when Prime Minister Carney was running to be in the election period, somebody at one of his rallies yelled out, there's a genocide happening in Gaza. And he responded, just a knee-jerk reaction. He said, I know, but that's why we have an arms embargo on them. And then clearly his inner circle said, Mark, you shouldn't have said that. But that was his natural reaction because he's sort of backtracked from that the very next day. But it's like, no, he said, I know, that's why we have an arms embargo. So I mean, it's right there. Like, you can see that this is not good. I would say Canada-Israel relations are probably at the lowest point they've ever been in history, and that feeds into Jewish insecurity in the country. And so, and nothing pisses me off more than issuing statements like that, being so duplicitous, and then attack in bold or attack and they'll release a statement like, hey,
Condemning the fire, but you lit the match. You know what I mean?
that's it. It's like, don't say anything. Just, I'd rather them not say anything. So it's pretty rough.
Baseless reports of Israelis killing Palestinians at aid sites that don't exist just this past week.
Yeah.
I mean, weaponizing food, let's talk about that. It's Hamas has weaponized food more than anyone, and UNRWA.
Yeah, and I mean, there were no lunch boxes being handed out at Auschwitz or in Rwanda. There were no food lines, so you can't win. I mean, and a part of me thinks, if I'm the Israelis, there's got to be a part of them that's starting to think, well, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. We may as well just do what's in our best interest over the long term, which is a whole other podcast. But I think that is starting to permeate into Jewish society as well, where a lot of Jews in Canada, even, the way that I'm thinking is like, I'm just going to do what's best for me and my family and my community. And I'm just going to be as Jewish as I want to be. And I'm going to say what I want to say and be who I'm going to be. And whatever happens, happens. But right now we're really at an inflection point in the country where things could go in, either direction, for better or for worse. And things aren't looking particularly great right now.
So like in America, we have a clear polarization problem where Trump is framed as racist and fascist, and we have a left that, even on the moderate left, people on the far right sort of frame them as Marxist. And so that manifests itself in problems broadly, but it also makes it interesting within the Jewish community, because there's people in the Jewish community who, because they see one side as evil, won't really explore some of the ideas from the side that they perceive themselves being on as contributing to the problems around anti-Semitism. And that goes both ways. I'm curious, is that similar in Canada? How does that manifest with Carney and Pierre Poilievre? What can you say about the similarities and differences?
Yeah, it's very similar, and it's very unfortunate because somehow, and I haven't thought about it enough, but being pro-Israel or a Zionist is now associated with the right, which I don't even know what that means anymore. Like, I don't know what left is or right is anymore. I don't even know where somebody says, I've been in meetings or wherever people have said, like, well, how do you think of yourself? How would others think of you? I go, I have no idea. I don't even know what these terms mean anymore. But that's really pronounced here in Canada, where Carney and this government are not going to come out and be, clear, take a hard line in defense of Israel, because it's not on brand. Whereas Poilievre, who lost the election and who, may never recover from this, he may never be prime minister after this. He was all in on Israel and fighting the good fight for the country's Jewish population. What bothers me about this is this polarization where the truth and what's righteous loses its meaning. It's now, these are ideas that are connected, not as much, they're not rooted in reality for a lot of people now as much as they are rooted in political ideology, which is really problematic. It's not good. And, I did an interview before Trump, but, during the US election, somebody said, well, how do you think what's this going to mean for Jews? And I said, well, good and bad. he's going to be so pro-Israel at times that that's actually going to be bad for Jews in America because he's such a divisive figure. The polarization is so intense. It's the same thing here. So we've really got to move away from having these things thought of as part of political ideologies, and we need to find a way to get back to, understanding that there are things that are right and wrong, and there are things that are true and untrue.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think as Jews, we have to be wary of both sides, and almost, you kind of need a healthy centrist. Just like economics, you kind of need a healthy middle class. I think in politics, you need a healthy center body that deviates from the tribalism, because otherwise what you're going to have is it's not even altruistic in your pursuits. I bring it back to oversimplifying it, right? Like, we are binary as people. Like, that's why basketball games only have two teams. Like it's just how we are. There's one side and there's another side, and it probably makes sense on some evolutionary scale, but then it also, at a certain point, is, it's not helping. And I think in the political realm, we see that the most. It's about tribalism, not what's best.
Well, it's hard to explore nuance. It takes a lot of energy. It's very easy to just kind of say yes, no, 0, 1. Yeah, unfortunately.
Right. And, everything's gray, right? I mean, like, that really is the reality of human nature, is everything is gray. And, but it takes more of a intellectual honesty and time and energy to pursue it,
There have been some things though in the country where I've gone, okay, well, that's pretty good. If you look at some of these pro-Hamas rallies in Canada, they're getting smaller in size, and there's a fatigue that's set in. And you look at the numbers and like the who's going to these things. They're not as big and scary as you might think, although there have been some very, very serious concerning incidents. On the flip side of it, there was just a walk for Israel in Toronto that had like 56,000 people show up. That's pretty big. I don't know in Canada's history if there's ever been, I'm not a historian, but if there's ever been a rally of that size ever. So that's good.
One more macro point too is, I do think that's built in our tribe's DNA, is like, I mean, we've lived this life, but if you extend and look at, the Jewish life, throughout the ages, this isn't new, right? And I think it's that resilience and that callous of our people that we've developed. It might manifest in the 90s as humor, or it might manifest now as grassroots advocacy movements or books written on it. But I do see a change in the air, and I do see an activation in the Jewish community and our allies, because I think people are starting to see what's at stake here after seeing these 2 years of these protests and on college campuses. And I think what's really the line in the sand now is it's not even about religion or anything. It's an ideological warfare between Western values and not Western values. And I think people who can transparently see that are getting activated now. So there is some optimism there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we think that that's the majority of people? Like you say that the pro-Palestine, or I'd say anti-Israel rallies, they're getting smaller. Is that because there's a silent majority that just isn't speaking out? What do you think?
I think it's a variety of things. I think there's a fatigue that sets in. I think the Canadian population, just generally speaking, is starting to get increasingly sick of this stuff. I think people are going to work in Toronto and they're sick of seeing Union Station taken over.
Same, by the way.
Yeah. They're sick of going downtown and trying to put a sandwich in their mouth, and they have to walk over large groups of men praying on the street in public. Like, I think people are getting tired of this stuff. The schools that have been shot at, the synagogues that have been firebombed, the people that have been harassed, the multiple terrorist attacks that have been thwarted in Canada. Again, not going to really make the news in the US. The news, the flow of information is, we consume your information. Americans don't know. I could come down.
We're sorry on behalf of our media. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, some of it's great. Some of it's great. You guys really do make great TV. Even your news is like, it's like entertainment. And I spent a lot of time in the States. But, you know, Americans the average American wouldn't know this, but it's rather shocking that, between, I think, 2023 and 2024, terrorism-related incidents in Canada are up almost 500%.
No idea about that.
No.
Like, for a size of the country, we typically think of Canada in policy circles or in scholarly meetings or whatever, scale of 1 to 10. 40 million, 400 million. It's just an easy way for us to think of it. If there's 10 people working on a file in the government here, we go, there's probably about 100 people in DC working on that. For the size of the country, the amount of terrorism-related incidents that has happened here, much of which is targeted against the Jewish community, it's astounding. We've had, there was a father-son duo planning an ISIS-inspired attack against the Jewish community. There were teens in Ottawa planning an attack against the Jewish community. We had a guy from Canada travel to Israel to kill Jews in Israel. He was neutralized. There's been numerous other attacks. I wrote about it in Newsweek or the Hill. I mean, like, this stuff's out there. It's bad here. And I think, to what we were talking about earlier, I think average Canadians are starting to go like, oh, there's another terrorism related thing.
Like maybe they do want to bring the Intifada here. Like they say, you have a right to believe your enemy. Like if someone's saying, I want to bring the Intifada here, and they're, they might want to bring the Intifada. Yeah.
And call them your enemy without being called racist for it.
Yeah. I mean, we have, in the last year, they've designated Samidoun as a terrorist organization. They've designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization, and they've designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization. So all of these stories and issues together, I think, are affecting the larger population. And that's, I think, contributing to some of what we're seeing.
How much does immigration and integration drive that?
Oh, man, this is a whole other issue. Like, we...
Basically, sum it up in a couple sentences now.
Yeah. My sense is that when people immigrate to America, there's an identity that typically there's an identity, there's ideals, there's a dream still that is very real and that they can believe in.
Assimilate into.
Yeah. They can buy into that and believe that. And rightfully so. In Canada, the message has always basically been like, just come here as you are. That's it. We love everybody. We will accept everybody. Come as you are. There are many issues that come along with that. That's great. That's a great idea. But, when you have Prime Minister Trudeau saying in the New York Times 10 years ago that there's no such thing as Canadian identity, people in Iran or Iraq or Syria or wherever, all sorts of places from around the world where there are real issues in terms of conflict and ideology, people see that and hear that and they go, oh, nice. Like, so we can immigrate to Canada, take in all of the benefits that come with that, but not abandon any of our, not leave any of our belief system behind us. We bring it with us. So when you're bringing in millions of people who have been born and raised in countries where Jews were literally purged from those countries, they're not coming here and thinking about Jews or Israel the ways that we are. And these are creating issues for us, but we're not allowed to talk about these things because then you're called racist. But it's a real issue. And, right now I'm writing a piece for the Free Press, which should be out next week or the week after, hopefully, on, again, Americans wouldn't know this. And this is why I'm writing it for an outlet that is primarily consumed by Americans. We have at least officially dozens of former senior Iranian officials from the regime now living in Canada. And they come here and they settle in Canada because, as many immigration lawyers have told me, they know that they can get in and they won't face really any repercussions, despite the fact that they are supposed to be inadmissible. So, and I talk to dissidents and they go, oh no, it's hundreds. It's maybe even thousands. So, and they're coming here and they're claiming refugee status because that keeps the system, according to our laws, that ensures that their identities get to remain protected. In 2021, there was a former general in Iran's police force just working out on the elliptical at a gym in Toronto. People are like, I'm pretty sure he tortured family members of mine, and he's just at
Wow. This is like out of that Sacha Baron Cohen movie almost to me.
yeah. And so
The Dictator, where he just like blends in.
yeah. So it's crazy. These are real issues here, and if you go on, this is public data. If you go on the Government of Canada website that deals with immigration, right now there's over 2 million applications in the system. 2 million. I think it's 760,000 that are backlogged for a country of 40 million, and we have 2 million people, 2 million applications. That's like a lot. If you,
I'm no mathematician. It sounds like a lot. Yeah.
I mean, imagine. I don't know this, but I don't think if you use a scale of, are there 20 million applications in the U.S. right now? Probably not. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, big issue, man.
I don't know enough about it. Yeah. Wow. Like intellectually, this is like kind of like multiculturalism versus what we have in the United States is e pluribus unum, out of many one. And like that's on our money. It actually says that, I think still. And the idea is that, we can respect people's cultures and where they come from, but at the end of the day, we all have to come together under a common cause and common values. And I think we've let this idea that setting aside people's cultural backgrounds to any extent is a racist inclination and that's stopped us from really becoming unified in any way. At Navi, one of our values for K-12 education is unity amid diversity. So diversity is great, but as long as we can find a way to unify while respecting and considering how that diversity can bring value to everybody. This, I feel like, is a conversation that doesn't get had enough in liberal circles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it touches on a little bit of like the sanctity of how some people view globalism and the realities of where people are in different cultures and whether they're ready for globalism and to kind of cooperate on that level of globalism. So I think you kind of like start touching a nerve in on the left, at least, where they go, ideologically, we all want to build this utopian kind of movement, which I would love that too. And I think there just needs to be the reality of, I remember being ideological in 23 and saying to my uncle, oh, in the future, there's going to be no boundaries, there's going to be no lines. And him explaining to me that does erase identity and that does erase culture and tradition. And I was like, I never really saw that. So when you push that agenda, you're taking away here. So it's really a balance.
You had a family member tell you that?
What's up?
You had a family member tell you that?
Yeah,
there's no one in my family who would ever say anything that profound. He put it even like in like a Wendy's. Like I have boomer parents. They'd be like, "Yeah, here's $10. See you tomorrow." Like nothing profound. Nothing.
This was an uncle. My parents would have given me the $10. My uncle happened to be a judge and happened to be wise and someone who I would go to. And he really did distill it down to. He's like, no matter what you say, people like their neighborhoods. And there's some truth to that. I mean, like, you have your communities that you build and that you invest in. And when you do just go macro like that, certain people get left behind. So.
Yeah. And we can bring that back to the Jewish community too, because it's like, to what extent am I American versus Jewish? And how has that changed over the last 5 years?
Yeah.
And, we talk about the fact that unity is better, but we've all sort of come back into this, I'd say, like shell of Judaism in a lot of ways to protect ourselves. And to what extent is that healthy or unhealthy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we could talk about all the sorts. I mean, the many Canadians, the many Americans that have never served in the military, but have gone and volunteered to fight with the IDF. So, things have changed since October 7th, for sure.
And I'd like to continue those conversations and bring you back on and have them next time, Casey.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys.
Follow the Chicago Jewish Alliance to stay in the loop and subscribe to this podcast so you can see what's coming next. We're going to have speakers that represent the entire spectrum of the Jewish community, from philosophical thinkers, from soldiers, people on the front lines of advocacy work on universities. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.